Everybody. So we're used to looking here, but now we got camera over there. So hey, everybody. Welcome to week 182. Jack gets a hall pass today because he's at some brouhaha, legally mumbled jumbo, boondoggle that is going to be cloaked as learning, I think. Right? I mean,
CLE/boondoggle.
Right. We miss you, Jack. So anyway, this is going to be fun, and this could save you a lot of money today because we're going to talk about owner fringe benefits, what may pass and what may not pass. So you guys know what to do. Hit us up on the chat and harass us if you want. And if you want to, we would love to have questions. So that is a huge question that we get. I don't know, before we dive into it, do you want to hit any current events that are worth that aren't depressing?
I could have given a lecture series on tax revenue versus expenditure, but I will not. This is a more important topic to our
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Tax revenue versus expenditure. Maybe stay tuned for week 183. I don't know.
Yeah.
So we are in the throes of tax planning, the push for that, and we should be doing it year round, quite frankly. And we really try to, for especially our business clients that need a little bit more of that on a more routine basis, and it's built into our process. But it seems like it gets everybody's attention this last quarter. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, all right, if it's not too late, or even if it is too late for this year, what should you be doing for next year? But let's talk about owner fringe benefits. And I'm going to tee that up with this first question, because this was a question that came to me off of LinkedIn from our post about this specific thing. So the question was, Adam, what is the most unusual request that you've had for an owner fringe benefit? And I want it to be parsed into two pieces. One would be legitimate, that is kind of surprising. And then one would be illegitimate, that might be surprising that we had to do ixnay. No.
Yeah. It's actually the same client. So it's pretty easy. So let me just start with just everybody that's here, common definition of what are we even talking about with owner fringe benefits.
And it's not French benefits.
French, yeah, it's Fringe, F-R-I-N-G-E, so meaning like a perk. So if y'all ever read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, it was pretty popular, late 90s, early 2000s, and the punchline was get a business, because then you can deduct things and pay for them pre-tax. So if I want to go by Robert Kiyosaki's example from the book was, I wanted a new Rolex. So, I could use post-tax money for that. Or I could say, Robert, you won an award, here's your Rolex. And now it's pre-tax. By the way, that is not correct. But that was the example you used in the book. So we have a common frame of reference.
Oh, wow, okay.
The IRS actually within the tax code has an entire section of these are allowable fringe benefits, and then there's another body of case law exists. So these are perks. Like when people talk about what are the benefits of being a business owner, it's paying for stuff pre-tax. This is a perk. It's considered part of your total. Like what am I making? Part of it is what are the fringe benefits I'm getting a deduction for pre-tax. And these are all things that if you go to sell your company are going to be considered add backs for the purposes of calculating your sales price, because while they're, another definition, ordinary and necessary, the tax code says, Gary, only business expenses that are ordinary and necessary are deductible. That is different from what's ordinary and necessary to operate the business. I know that can be confusing, but it's sort of the same thing as, who's a U.S. resident? There's an IRS definition of a U.S. resident, and that's just, somebody here earn an income, whether legal or illegal, you know, and then there's a definition of a resident with the US Immigration Department, which is, hey, that's only legal people. Illegals, so you can be a US resident here illegally paying taxes. But and be called a resident there, but not a resident for the purposes of any other government service. My only point in bringing that up is that ordinary and necessary, two different definitions. I'm talking about the IRS will let it pass. So to answer your question, it was actually the same client, and this was in the audit examination. So I just want to be clear that this passed who I would argue was the most by the book, pain in the ass auditor that I have ever faced. This is a guy that we had a different client was audited and had taken a deduction that the auditor said, sounds good, appreciate your definition. 2 years later, was audited again, same issue comes up. This guy that I'm talking about now denied it. And I said, Chris, I have like an audit report that allowed me to do this 2 years. Well, that guy's an idiot. You can't rely on that as source documentation. We won it on appeal, but it's like, you gotta be kidding. Like, you told me, the IRS told me, do an audit. I could do this. And you said no. Like, this is good. So this guy's a jerk. Well, he was very thorough in his job. So these are actually, answer the question a little bit differently. These aren't items that I was asked about in advance. They just did it, but they're under fringe benefits. So one of the things that we always advise our clients to do is that every company has to have an annual meeting. Like, they're supposed to have annual meetings, right?
Yeah.
You know, like if you ever get sued, you know, one of the things that will be requested are the annual meeting minutes. You know, if you're ever audited, one of the things will get requested are the annual meeting minutes, because they're looking for like, hey, you know, is there anything in there that, you know, might have changed, you know, the structure that needs to be accounted for. So you're supposed to have an annual meeting. Well, nobody says where I have to have my annual meeting. You know, it could be sitting in this conference room if I'm trying to conserve expenses, or it could be a Jack Saniello style corporate boondoggle, you know, where I'm going to Vegas, you know, and there's a couple days of, you know, they're 3-day event, you know, very set agenda, even if it's just me and my wife, you know, 3-day event, very set agenda, and it's going to be a combination of work and social activities. Both are legitimate, ordinary, necessary expenses in the eyes of the IRS, whether it's the, you know, coffee, this is not coffee, it's water, but the coffee that I bought here, or alternatively, you know, the hotel room that I paid for at Caesar's Palace. You know, they're both ordinary, necessary. Second one would be an add back to a sales price, but I could still deduct it. So this client was a member of EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, and he was the incoming forum chair, which is like the guy that runs the group, you know, for the next year. And part of what you're supposed to do as a forum chair is to have an annual meeting of your forum in some cool destination. Okay, well, you know, I can kind of see that cool destination. Probably, you know, would pass muster, you know, because it's like I didn't join EO for my health. You know, I joined it to try to be a better entrepreneur. There's educational value associated with that that's making me a better leader and a better business owner. So I can make the case for that pretty easily. In determining where to hold his forum, he conducted 2 research trips with his family.
Oh, gosh.
And then those 2 research trips were not the ultimate destination that he arrived at. So 2 trips not associated with where he actually held the forum took his family. I looked at that and I said, okay, that's going to be a rough one, especially given who we have on the docket as our auditor. I can't guarantee this baby's going to, I'm going to make the best case that I can, you know, got the EO website printed out, you know, here's what the purpose of it is. But I'm like, no guarantees with Chris that this is, and I'm not going to use Chris last time. No guarantees that Chris is going to pass muster, but we'll give it the old college try. I'm going to do my best job to fit in this baby. It freaking passed.
Wow.
You know, it passed.
Both research trips.
Both research trips passed.
Well, I guess you can't call it boondoggle.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't put.
You can't call it family vacation.
Yeah, he didn't put the, but there was nobody else on the trip but him and his family, and the purpose of the research was to make sure that the destination was going to be good enough for his forum family members to have things to do while they were there.
And it passed this really anal retentive auditor.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
That is amazing.
Same client, same audit. Again, he did this, and it's like, had he asked me, I would have said to Gary, hell no.
Yeah.
So I've actually used an example when clients, when they ask, well, what can I deduct? This guy owned a financial planning firm, and he deducted his business suits.
Oh,
yeah,
as uniforms.
As you like, the tax code actually says that you can't do that. But what? I wouldn't wear a suit, you know, if I worked for this job. Yeah, but you can also use that thing for a funeral, you know, going out to like, just don't try. That's dumb. And when you do stuff like that, you just start to lose credibility on the other items.
Yeah.
So that was an example of, you know, no can do. So I've always, you know, it made me, that experience really led me to kind of double down on, well, hell, if that made it through, what else could make it through? You know, from a studying the subject of owner fringe benefits category.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty good. Now, Papa Joe, yes, a company aircraft can be deductible. Let's talk about that too, because I had a business partner and we had a twin engine Conquest airplane. And it was nice, and I loved having him be able to fly us around, but man, it was an expensive little hobby for him. And we could justify it in certain things, but and we actually had Brian Anders on the Anything But Typical podcast. If you haven't listened to it, it's really good. He was in a non-compete situation. He wanted to honor it. That non-compete probably wouldn't have been enforceable, but he's really a man of honor. And so he bought a single engine plane so that he could fly a 150-mile radius. That's how far the non-compete was, 150-mile radius outside of Winston-Salem or wherever it was that he was at the time, may have been Charlotte. And so he would hop in his airplane and fly 151 miles to wherever, you know, Nashville, where he was doing business, and deducted it. So let's talk about aircraft, when it makes sense, when it doesn't make sense, how to expense it appropriately, etc.
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, it's one of those things where it's like, I love it when clients ask me, well, what else is there? And I can tell them, well, you're kind of upping yourself into private jet money category, or private aircraft category.
Yeah.
And it really, you know, as an owner fringe benefit, you know, you're never going to make the math work. Because even if you went to like, hey, what if I went, you know, first class tickets, you know, you know, you can't fly, the expense of the aircraft cannot offset the first class tickets. Like you just never, so you're really, it really is a time play. Like I now have my time and I have an opportunity to get that time back as your justification. You know, especially if you're having to go to some odd duck locations that aren't super easy to get to.
Yeah.
So Myrtle Beach is a good example. You know, it's 4 hours to get there by car. It's 45 minutes from the Concord Airport in a single engine aircraft. So like that's a big difference when you think about me personally, going down and turning around in a day, 8 hours in the car versus 3 hours. It's a big difference from a quality of life standpoint. So with that in mind, to even enter into, hey, does this start to make sense to me as an expense? You probably need to be spending over about 100 hours a year on a plane. So just add up your time over 100 hours. That's where it starts to, okay, I can start to make a case for this. But the tax deduction is great, because you're basically, whether if you're effectively leasing the aircraft, which buying like a jet pool or something like that, like buying hours, I mean, that's just it. That's it. You buy 100 hours and now you got an expense. That's pretty straightforward. When it comes to buying a plane, it behaves pretty similar to a car, in the sense that I get to depreciate the plane and then I get to take the actual expenses associated with it against it. And what we often recommend is we set that up in a separate LLC, liability protection, all that. And basically you act as your own jet pool. So one LLC owns the aircraft and is actually operating it, and your company buys hours from it to help subsidize the expense, is typically how we handle the tax deduction for it. But from a documentation support, again, I've had it audited, basically what you're getting asked for are the FAA passenger manifest that you already have to report in the destination, and just a little scribble like, what was I doing? And as long as you're pretty good about carving out, like, hey, only people on the plane were me and my, family, and we went to Disney World. I mean, again, you go back to, well, hell, even that got through if I said EO forum.
Right. It was a scouting trip.
Yeah, scouting trip for company annual meeting. But when that's like a repeated pattern, I mean, that's when it would start, kind of your story would start to break down. But we've never had that, never had the aircraft challenged. Meaning like they've asked questions, and asking questions is completely different from, no, I don't believe an aircraft is ordinary and necessary for this business, because we all have customers and we all go see them.
Yeah.
So you're right, right there, you got it.
Yeah. Anybody have any questions on the corporate aircraft question and idea? Like, I think that was really helpful, because the fractional ownership thing, that wasn't available a long time ago. I mean, that was, and I don't even know that it was really available when we owned the aircraft. But I love the LLC play that you're buying hours, and that's a standalone entity that's probably going to lose money, I would imagine. I don't know,
Yeah, you're offsetting the expenses. From the company so you're reducing your taxable income here to offset the cost of the plane.
Yeah, cool. So while we're on that, a great way to make a small fortune is to start with a large fortune and own a NASCAR team. Now, Joe Gibbs seems to have done pretty well on that, but a friend of mine owned a NASCAR team, and Joe Gibbs took him in under his wing. It was the next layer down. It was a nationwide series at the time, but man, that was a big money draw. If let's say that somebody has a hobby, or their kids have a hobby and they're aspiring to be the next NASCAR driver or Indy or F1, we've got some clients that are in that world. How can you deduct some of those things as you've got a young buck that's doing the karting series and all that kind of stuff? Is it even possible?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Gary. And actually, it's not fairly common within our client base, but it's a fairly common question. So you kind of go back to the fact pattern associated with, is it a hobby versus is it not a hobby? And I'll give you I'll give you an easy example that you hear a lot. My daughter wants a horse. How do I deduct that? Because it's very similar, and I'll get to the racing in a second. You know, and you're an attorney, doctor, you know, whatever. How do I deduct a horse? Okay. If you bought the horse and never did anything with it, you're not gonna win, you know. Even if you said, but it's a legitimate business, you know, I have full intention of selling the horse. You know, it's like if you've got no fact pattern that supports that in terms of like you actually did sell the horse, you know, you've had more than one horse. You're spending a little bit of time with it, you know, yourself to where it actually seems like a legitimate deal. You know, you're actively entering into competition, showing it, you know, have a pattern of like, in other words, you're treating it like the real deal. You know, you're not gonna win. So the key is you got to treat it like it's the real deal. So if you think about racing as an example, I don't know this. I can't give you the exact stat, but what I can say is, with the exception of Bubba Wallace, most everybody came from a fairly good financial background.
Right.
And the way that they got into their ride was coming up through the series. Hey, you know, my son's pretty good at this. Can he drive for you? Absolutely, Gary. And here's the sponsorship contract to sponsor his car. So I'm trading company advertising for basically paying for the freaking car. You know, I mean, like at the end of the day, you know, that how it works. I mean, we have a client, you know, right now, pretty prominent NASCAR driver, and the way he came up, you know, was his dad sponsored his car in the beginning. Like had a separate race team that was set up, and dad sponsored the car. Like you go to his race shop, you still see those, you know, early decals, you know, from dad's business. So that's the way that you do it. Like at some point, if it looks like the dog is going to hunt in terms of racing, because I mean, it really, if you take NASCAR as an example, I mean, the stats I've heard is it's about $1 million. Like if you're pretty serious about, hey, my kid, I think can have a future in this, you better be prepared to spend about $1 million. And it would be nice if there was a tax deduction for that. The tax deduction for that is company advertising, you know, at the end of the day.
So, you know, Jack talks about his son, and Jack, we're not trying to do your tax advice here. Oh yeah, Paul, 100, yeah, it's $1 million a year. And yeah, my friend, it was far more than that.
Yeah.
But so it drains the bank account pretty fast if you're not winning. And yeah, they came in second a couple times, whatever, but you know, and then 09 hit, and there's a lot of non-sponsorship, and so a lot of white hoods going around, and that's just not sustainable. But kind of back to Jackie's talked about, his son is really pretty good at doing this on the karting, but if you're just on the kart and you're not throwing dollars up to the next level, is there any way that you can deduct any of that?
I mean, you have well, what's the business? I mean, if there's no, in other words, if there's no prize money, you know, no sponsorship dollars available, no income producing opportunity, then I mean, that's really the key is there an income producing opportunity and a profit motive? So you take the karting, it's like, yeah, kind of maybe, but not until they hit a certain level. Then all you're really doing now is just investing, you know, in a future. So once there is the potential for income production, via sponsorship dollars or prize money, that's when you've really triggered the, hey, even if I'm not making really much of anything at it, I've tripped the threshold of this is a legitimate business. It's going to pass muster.
All right, cool. I have a suspicion what the most requested owner fringe benefit questions are, but I want to ask you what that is to either confirm or deny, and if it denies me, then I'll still ask that one.
No worries. I actually have no idea what you're about to ask, and this may or may not be the one that you're gonna ask, but this is one that I get asked a lot, and I'm gonna say yes, yes and no to it. So, we have a lot of some tax consulting only organizations are better marketers and promoters than, and I know, Gary, it hurts to hear that, but there
are a lot of really good ones.
They're better marketers and promoters than we are.
Yeah.
And they say, hey, let me have your stuff and take a look at it, and I'll find areas and opportunities for you, and blah blah. It's I've seen the reports. It's usually stuff that, hey, we brought up or we're already doing. Like, there's nothing new in there, with the lone exception of one area that they all seem to focus on. And here's what they always say: well, CPAs don't know about it, therefore they're not taking it. And it's called the Augusta rule.
Yeah.
So what the Augusta rule is, God bless the people in Augusta, Georgia, but it was named after people at the Masters that were renting out their houses to people going to the Masters and didn't want to claim the income. Like, hey man, this isn't I'm not really in the rental house business, and this is only for 3 days. Can I go ahead and just not claim the income, please? And I haven't done a lot of research into the how the lobby went to do that, but whatever they did, they won. Bravo. And it got applied nationwide. And what the Augusta rule is that you can rent your home for up to 14 days and not claim the income. So you don't get to deduct any expenses, but you also don't have to claim any of the income. And we get at, man, I heard about this rule, man. Is it legit? Like, I should be doing this. I'm doing this, right? Like, why are we doing this, Adam? Why are we doing this? It's not. So here's my answer. It's not that it's risky. It's just stupid relative to the similar opportunity that exists. So let's just start with, what's the whole secret to owner fringe benefits? The whole secret to owner fringe benefits is that, hey, I've got a business case for it. That was my business case for renting my house from myself for 14 days.
Right.
Like, because wouldn't that negate my home office deduction? If I did that, like, why is it both my home office and I rented it for myself for 14 days? I mean, so that's just answer that paradoxical question, for me. Second off, what's the value? Let's say that okay, that's not the case. I've got this nice BW place in South End. We're gonna rent 514 Greenway Street for. I should have given Gary's address, by the way. For I didn't say what's that. For 14 days, 2 weeks or whatever, right? Okay, well, how do I determine the price of that? Okay, well, the price of that, what do I have to look at? Probably VRBO. That's gonna be my best bet. So, I don't know this, but I'd suspect that a house in Davidson, probably $200 a night, maybe what it goes for. Yeah. So I'm going to rent it for myself for $200 a night. Going to need some help with the math on this, but that would be $2,800. $2,800 is a tax deduction. That's not chump change, but okay, so you got it. I'm going to get a $2,800 deduction. My effective income tax rate is about 30%. So that $2,800 is now $1,000 in my pocket. Way to go. You found me $1,000 that I got to put in my pocket. Compare that to, Gary, what did you spend on your last vacation that could have otherwise doubled as your annual meeting?
Right.
Most of the time it's 10, 15 freaking $1,000.
Yeah. So
again, if I'm standing before St. Peter, which is in this case, the IRS agent who is auditing me, and I've got to make the case, how am I going to make the case that I had a legitimate reason for my 14 days and the vacation.
Yeah.
The BGW position on that one is it's really an or, in other words, like you're not, like it's just stupid. Like it's just not worth it. Like in other words, I'd rather get the big one rather than the small one, in that case. So we get asked about the Augusta rule all the time. And I'm always pleased to say, I have great news for you. We're doing way better than that. Remember when I tell you, what vacation did you take that could double as your annual meeting? Let's just document the facts. You're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually that wasn't where I was going to go. Oh, we got a few good questions here. Joe, if we want to guarantee to lose money every year, get into the horse business, the feral farms.
Yeah, that's about right, Joe. Yep.
Yeah. So, hey, Miriam, good to see you here. Should fringe benefits be recorded in a separate account or the corresponding expense account? Thinking about the most effective way to add back to calculate EBITDA in the event of needing to calculate a selling price.
Yeah, so great question, Miriam, and that's one that we get asked a lot. And I think, like, how it's hard to establish trust with people, and especially like when we're dealing with a newer client, and a lot of times they've been working with Dr. No. It's like, so you work for the IRS? Like, seriously, are you supposed to be my advocate, or are you working for this? So they're just used to being told no. What does that mean? That means they're used to hiding stuff, and in hiding stuff from me, it's sort of like going to the doctor and not telling me about your symptoms because you're embarrassed by them.
Yeah.
So my point in saying all that is that what we always suggest, Miriam, is that you have a separate account for them. And while not technically correct GAAP treatment, I like to see them below the line in other income or other expenses, so that you as a user of your own financial statements can just real quickly say, that's the real money, that's the fake money. So that, and people are like, well, but if the IRS comes in, aren't they going to look at that and say, geez, let me worry about that. That's my job. Because whether you hide them or not, they're going to ask you for a full general ledger and do their own analysis. So that's a red herring. And it's like, I'd rather it be separately stated, and I'd rather it be separately stated in an account that is below operating income, so that it's very easy for you to run the business, calculate bonuses, do whatever you're going to do, go to that EBITDA number and know what it is, so that you're not like having the whole, well, Gary, let me, how nice it is when it's like, okay, ready to sell the company, let's get the EBITDA, let's get the add backs and stuff like that. The buyer's team like, oh, here we go. This MF is gonna, try to make the case that, you could run this thing on a thimble,
Right.
Whereas if you could say, actually, I'm not going to ask for any add backs in the owner, in the normal section of the P&L, it's only in this section. That way you're not arguing about, was this travel necessary, but this is unnecessary. Right. I mean, that's really what it's for. It's like, how do I make the case to a potential buyer that this one's boondoggle, this one's not? How am I supposed to trust you?
Yeah.
Unless I've got like a fact pattern that supports that.
Yeah, it makes it clean.
Yeah, that's right. So I like clean and separate.
Yeah, I think that's good. So before we leave Augusta rule, so during the Wells Fargo Championship, and especially when it was a PGA Tour Championship, my neighbor rented his house for like 10 grand.
Yeah,
for the week. Hey, pretty good.
So he got to exclude that.
He got to like pocket that. I had no idea, and he's smart enough. He was an investment banker, so he did. All right, that's cool. No, I was going to get more pedestrian.
Okay.
And that is vehicles.
Yeah.
So let's talk about buying versus leasing, because that's got to be a question all the time. And then let's talk about, I want to add two other little nuances. One would be like a collectible.
Mhm.
You know, we know. If I know a guy that's got 3 McLarens but they are all like for investment type stuff, you know, I mean, like, it's. He makes money on his collectible McLarens. All right, cool. So, but let's talk about the more pedestrian buy versus lease. You know, do I get a big, whatever it is, over 2,000 pounds, so that, let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Let's start with the car in the first place. Because here would be a real common thing that we would get asked. I don't know, Gary. I mean, I work out of my home. I don't really drive anywhere. Or I just go to the office. I don't go anywhere. I don't know, man. I mean, is that gonna be okay? So my old neighbor Tom used to work for a medical device manufacturer, and worked out of a home office and traveled to customers maybe 1 day a week, and was provided a company car to do so.
Mm.
And that was a tax deduction for the medical device manufacturer. So what I can say about cars, regardless of whether or not you do a lot of driving or you don't do a lot of driving, is I've never even had that be an item that came up in an audit.
Really?
Yep. So the only thing that's ever come up is, hey, how's the car titled? That's titled in the personal name. Yeah, we really wish it was in the company, but otherwise, you're good to go. So it's really been, again, knock on the table. It's really been a non-issue for us from an audit perspective. And again, you kind of go back to, man, if it's okay for a Fortune 500 medical device manufacturer to provide a vehicle for its traveling salespeople who don't travel, remind me again why I can't deduct a car for my business. And the only thing the IRS is really going to care about is like, okay, well, that's great. But at the same time, there's only 220 business days out of the year. You're deducting the full expense. Why are you doing that?
Right.
And the response to that should be either A, well, it's not the full expense, it's only 220 days out of 365, or B, I have a second car at home that I drive on the weekends. That car is parked, which is no different than like the construction company that provides a pickup to their superintendents. Like that's the same concept. Here's your pickup. Here's your company on pickup. Our expectation is you're only using it for work purposes. It's sitting in your driveway on the weekend. Sure, boss man. You got it. Same concept applies. The lease versus buy thing. Either way, a car is a deduction. You basically either pick miles that you're deducting, or you pick actual expenses that you're going to deduct. Actual expenses would include depreciation of the car in the case of the lease, depending on the nature of the lease payments. Either way, it's an expense. You're really just debating, am I getting a front-loaded expense, which would happen if I bought the car, or am I getting an expense over time, which would be more of the traditional lease scenario? It's more of a timing preference. So the way that I typically answer that question, Gary, is, look at the economics that are the best for you, because you're really only talking about the difference of like a year or two in terms of the timing of the deduction, which isn't that long. With it being front loaded versus over time, it's still the same expense. So if I'm a car guy and I'm a car flipper, look, the economics would tell me all day long, even if I'm foregoing a little bit of a tax deduction, I'm probably better off to lease the car. Because what would happen is if I bought the car, fully wrote it off, and then traded it in after 2 years, bought the next car, the only expense that I'm getting on the next car is the difference between the original car purchase price and the new car. So first car was 60 grand, second car was 70 grand. That second car, all I got was 10 grand. Like you're not getting 60 and then you're getting 70. You're getting 60 and then the incremental difference between them. Versus a lease, it's like you're just deducting the lease payment and the actual expenses associated with it. So I always base that off, you know, do you drive cars into the dirt or not? You know, I'm a drive into the dirt guy. I mean, it's embarrassing to say, but until recently, the Boatsman family cars were all towed off by Cars for Kids because they literally freaking died. Dead. No redeeming resale value on that car.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of cars, Joe, man, it's so good to see you here. Can you speak to car allowances as well?
Yeah, so what a car allowance is just me saying, hey, Gary, you know, and either we can buy you a car or alternatively, we can give you the money and then you go buy the car. Either way, it behaves the same way. It's a tax deduction for the company, not considered income to the recipient, whether that's the owner or an employee, except for if that was the person's only car, you might get into some personal use issues on the weekend that you have to deal with. So either way, it's the deduction. The way that I think about a car allowance is it acts a lot like a lease, you know, instead of me leasing a car and paying for it on your behalf, Gary, I'm just giving you $1,000 and saying, you do what you're gonna do with it. I'm actually a big fan of it. If you're a single owner, you know, I'd buy the car. But if you're in a multi-owner scenario, even though it's not front loading the tax deduction, I'm a much bigger fan of the car allowance because it allows you to be fair. Because if you like driving a Porsche, but I'm going to be donating my car to Cars for Kids, it's the same $1,000 that we're receiving.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just you happen to be upside down. I happen to be in the money, but it's the same $1,000 and we're all fair. If we get in the case of a multi-owner scenario, you know, then you sort of get into this, like it starts to become what I've seen it become is like, you know, an arms race.
Yeah.
Well, Gary got a new car, I need to get a new car. Well, Gary got a better car, I need to get a better car. And it's like, pretty soon, you know, we're driving $100,000 freaking cars. And we're like, what the hell did we just do? we're car poor. So I'm a bigger fan of the car allowance in a multi-person environment. It's also a great way that, you know, if you're trying to get your employees tax-free compensation, car allowance is a good way to go, you know, for that.
Yeah.
That's a perk, you know, that's a perk of being here is I gave you a car.
Yeah. Now, it's funny, my partner that had the twin engine airplane, he insisted on driving a 750 IL BMW. and my other partner and I, like I had a little sob, you know, had the same amount because he needed to justify the 750 IL. But and since we did use personal, we did a percentage of usage. Yeah. You know, and so hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, see, so with the classic car, or the
Like
exotic car,
yeah,
it's the same deal. You know, you'd want as kind of the horse, you know, scenario. It's like you'd want to have a fact pattern of I actually bought and sold them, which would allow, you know, and from there you kind of got options in terms of what's the income treatment, you know, if I'm deducting expenses versus I'm capitalizing expenses and then, you know, treating it as long-term or short-term capital gain. But once you pick a treatment for that nature of the business, then you kind of need to stick with it. So if I'm like flipping cars every couple months, the tax treatment's the same, you know, it's ordinary income. It's either short-term gain or it's ordinary income and expenses. In that scenario, you might be better off going with the same concept as a day trader in stocks, which is, hey, it's all ordinary income and expenses. You know, if your window of buying and selling the car is always less than 12 months. The other option that you got available to you now, I mean, it's great, is a Turo business, you know, which if you guys are not familiar with Turo, it's, you know, basically it's the VRBO of rental cars. I've done it a couple times. It's freaking awesome because as a consumer,
Yeah,
you can get a pretty damn nice car for the same price
yeah,
as you would get at the Avis counter, but you're getting a dude that's, coming, dropping it off to you. We're talking like BMW 7 series
yeah,
cars
yeah,
for the same price as my, Impala or whatever. I can't.
yeah, that's right.
A good car,
That's
right?
right.
And I'm not dealing with the rental car line. But if I'm the person with the business, I got to buy and deduct the car in exchange for the low offset of renting it out periodically
Yeah.
to people. So it's a good way to subsidize some pretty cool exotic cars. A lot of you guys know I have a 67 Mustang convertible. I haven't been aggressive with it yet, but the same concept exists for classic cars. So I'm like, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. Or if I was to start using it in a BGW advertising,
Yeah. For the
that-
BGW parade.
yeah, that could be a thing.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, the Turo, we did that in Los Angeles. We rented a BMW convertible and it was cheaper because we wanted to go through, Hollywood and all that. Like we wanted to experience with my son and his daughter and his wife, my daughter-in-law. What a beautiful day in California.
Yeah, right. So
cool.
Paul's got a comment of the 63 Impala, but nobody drives it but me. So here's what you would do that. Like if I'm going to use my 67 Mustang as an example, what I would do with that is I would use it in a video, meaning like, hey, let's film a video where we're around the car, as a featured item for whatever reason, post that. And my case for that would be, well, dude, the car was a set piece, no different than if I had to rent the car for making a movie. To rent that car is $1,000 a day, so I've got a business expense of $1,000 that I'm paying to myself for the car rental to help offset.
Ooh, I like that.
Offset a portion of the expense. Again, I'd want to actually be able to produce a video that's got the Mustang in it.
Yeah.
But that would generally be the kind of case that I would do.
Well, that does lead into, I'm just looking at time. Kids, well, my kids are 7 and 4,
Yeah.
can't, do anything with those guys. They're too young to, collate papers and whatever, do office work. You can do that for advertising for your company.
Yeah, that's right. So we're big fans of paying the kids. The way that works is that, they're doing something anyway for me. And by paying them, I'm able to get a deduction in my tax rate. And as long as the amount that I'm paying them is below $11,000 round numbers, that's zero income tax as a tax bracket. So I'm taking for my tax rate, paying them, and now it's zero in their tax bracket. And, kind of the theory behind that would be, first off, it's a great way to transfer wealth if you're looking to transfer wealth. Secondly, if we're ultimately trying to save for college, that's a way to be paying them. And then they can then, with the understanding that they're going to use those resources to finance their college, no different than, my kids worked at Witt's Frozen Custard that helped pay for their living expenses. So when it comes to the modeling fee, so we get asked a lot about that with young kids. What have you seen, Adam? The only IRS, never an issue with the kids. The only issue that I've ever seen with kids actually came from the Social Security Administration and the Department of Labor. And it was not whether or not this was a legitimate deduction. It was more like, hey, we're concerned. Was your kid's identity stolen? That not like, was it legit for them to work or not, or anything like that. So, there are some restrictions around like operating, hazardous equipment that's got some age restrictions, but otherwise, you're pretty wide open. So you get back to the modeling fee for the younger kid, because that would be kind of the go-to move with the modeling fee. Well, what do you got? It's modeling. like what am I, Christmas cards, that's an easy one, Hanukkah cards, advertising stuff that you got around the office. I gotta tell you, I mean, I don't know if he's listening to the webinar, but the guest that you had at the CEO Convergence event, Damon, why am I drawing a blank?
Oh, Burton. Yeah.
Damon Burton. Fabulous, presentation on SEO. But part of his, and part of the new selling philosophy is the part of his new selling philosophy is to so answer Mark's question real quick. Yeah, like at some level you'd have Social Security, but it's pretty de minimis relative to the tax deduction that you would have depending on how you pay them. But part of Damon's thing is that, hey, you need to be better about humanizing yourself out there on social media so people get to know you as a person that they potentially want to do business with. Part of what Damon does, he doesn't use his kids' faces, but part of what he does is he uses his kids in his posts.
Yeah, stories.
His stories that he wants to humanize his kids with. Why? Tell me why I can't pay him $500 per appearance.
Yeah, interesting.
Considering that his income is derived primarily off of his social media presence.
While we're still on cars and liability, Trey, good to see you. He said, regarding cars and liability in your airplane scenario, sort of similar. Any thoughts on a separate LLC to own cars, both from an expense, tax, and liability perspective?
It's a good question, Trey. The problem that you get into with the separate LLC for the cars is that it's then subject to, and you can't get out of this, it's subject to sales tax. So in other words, like if I'm gonna do like the Turo thing, like I talked about, that should be a separate LLC. But if it's otherwise like my company car that I'm using and I'm going to air quote rent it from myself, North Carolina is going to say that's subject to sales tax, no different than if you went to the Avis counter, and rented a car. We get asked that question a lot. Where it comes up a lot is in construction companies that want to put their heavy equipment into a separate LLC for liability purposes and lease it back. The problem is now you got to charge yourself sales tax. And it's like, what?
Yeah,
but it was me. And they're idiots that don't care.
Interesting.
Meaning the North Carolina Department of Revenue.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. All right, cool. As we're kind of rounding towards the end, one of the things in the post was about Taylor Swift tickets.
Yeah.
So, there were some changes that were made, and we saw this with an owner of a Major League Sports team. All of their when some tax law changes, and I think it was under Obama administration, if I'm not mistaken.
Trump.
No, but before, like their loges and all that, they had too many, and now they couldn't deduct them anymore.
Yeah. So what happened? It's a good question. So what happened under what happened under the earlier tax regime for the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is they said, okay, look, you can deduct entertainment as a business expense, but it's got to be what the commoners would pay. So like the load, like if you got the load section, you got the box.
Luxury boxes. Yeah,
you can't deduct the luxury box. What you can deduct is the ticket value of the cheap seats.
Okay.
So, okay, well that at least we got something. That kind of sucks. With the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they then said, by the way, no deduction for entertainment. So at face value, they got rid of entertainment as a class. So overnight, people are like, that freaking sucks, because it's, like my key customer, Gary, he counts on me every year
Yeah,
to get him the Masters tickets.
right.
You know, and we go to that's our jam. We go to the Masters together. It's like, I don't want to, like, what am I supposed to, like, I'm still going to spend the money, you
Right.
know, and it's not like, you know, by the way, I love you, Gary, but I don't even like Gary. Like, like, don't tell me this isn't ordinary and necessary. Like, if you ever want to have a funny social experiment, go to a luxury box during a Panthers game and look at all the bankers that invited people that they can't stand, that they have to entertain because it was their time in the box.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like seriously, like, hey Gary, are you having a good time? You know, like, absolutely.
It's so true.
Yeah, so they absolutely hate it. So the thing is, though, in the new rules related with entertainment's out, but the exception that applies to entertainment is if it's proximate to a business purpose. And there's no definition of what proximate means, but the general feeling about the tax wonks would be pretty close to same day. So use golf as a good example, right? Because golf doesn't count anymore. Golf's entertainment. You know, what the hell am I supposed to do? Gary, I'd like to do an account review with you. And here's what we're gonna do. We'll do it over a round of golf. You know, it sounds like we'll just we'll have a good time, you know, allow us to bond a little bit more. You know, we'll kind of kick off, you know, with a quick little lunch at the club, you know, do the review while we're playing golf, have a few other people that I want to introduce you to while you're there. They'll talk about other service offerings that we have, you know, and then we'll kind of close out with grabbing a drink, you know, at the end, just to see what the next steps are. I now have entertainment proximate to the business purpose. So that's versus like, Gary, you've been a real loyal customer, love you, bought you around at Pebble Beach, use it anytime in the next 12 months, non-deductible. I mean, technically it could be considered a gift if it's below, you know, $1,000, but Pebble Beach probably would be more than that.
Yeah, right.
But if instead it's like, you know, Gary, we're going to do the annual renewal, you know, over this thing, and here's the agenda, you know, that includes combinations of, you know, meals, meetings, structure, a thing that we do together, could be the Swifty tickets, that suddenly becomes deductible.
So, final question regarding that is that a red flag for an IRS audit when you have those kind of expenses itemized?
So what the IRS is typically, you know, if the IRS even gets to it, what the IRS is typically going to do in that particular scenario is to look at trends, you know, meaning like, do you have more of it? And by more, it would be like 20 times your peer average.
Okay. Oh, wow.
You know, like that's how they would look at it. It would be like, let's look at egregious outliers. That might put you in the pool of like, well, hey, let's look at this guy a little bit closer. And what would typically happen is they would do what's called a bench audit, which is send your letter saying, hey man, can you send us some support about what this stuff was? If you documented it well, shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, cool. Well, we're hitting the noon hour. This was good. I guess the question is, did we hit the big stuff, or is this worth spilling into another one?
I probably would hit another round. Got a few more to go.
Okay. All right. We'll do some new graphics, and then we'll be back next week for Owner Fringe Benefits Part 2.
All right. Sounds great, Gary.
All
Thanks,
right,
everybody.
See you guys.